All right, Nancy.
Good morning, and welcome to the Universalist Church Online. In which love is the spirit. We're glad you're here, whether you're joining us from West Hartford, Connecticut, or anywhere in the world. I'm Nancy Jeanette, one of your representatives on the board. We have Zoom fellowship times for our community throughout the week, as well as before and after the service on Sunday. You can find out more information about these gatherings by getting onto our mailing list through the contact page on our website. Please do read our weekly electronic communications, which have returned to Fridays. They're our best way to stay connected to you. Online worship is a bit different from being in the sanctuary. Technology sometimes fails us. We appreciate your graciousness when that happens. Today's order of service will appear in the chat box or the YouTube description. We'll have our Zoom fellowship time at about 10:45 after worship ends. If you're attending through Zoom today, please stay online, even if you need to step away for a short break, to join in conversation with one another. Please take a moment to wave hello to one another and to everyone watching our live stream. And now, please take a moment to turn off your email and other apps, put your keyboard away, and settle in for worship.
Ray, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to start over again. If you can hear me, you may have to unmute yourself. I don't seem to have the ability. please join me in speaking the words of our affirmation, our covenant. They're in the description and in the chat box as well. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning, y'all. I am grateful to be here. My name is Reverend Yadenee Hailu, coming at you from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I have a story for all ages. This is a well-known story about the Buddha that I first heard from Zen Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and it goes like this. One day the Buddha is meditating in a cave, and Ananda, his disciple, is serving the Buddha by guarding the entrance. Ananda is actually Sanskrit for pleasure or bliss. And from the Vedic cosmology or framework of the universe, all life is made of Sat, Chit, and Ananda, eternality, truth, and pleasure or bliss. And so Ananda often represents us in these stories. So Ananda's outside of the cave protecting the Buddha. And while Ananda's doing their due diligence and meditating probably or keeping watch, they notice that far in the horizon, they notice a figure approaching. And Ananda perhaps is excited, another disciple friend, or someone curious to finally learn about enlightenment. And instead, their stomach drops and their chest tightens when they realize and recognize who it is who's come to meet the Buddha. It's Mara. Mara is distraction and illusion itself. And Ananda braces for the drama, the mess Mara is sure to bring. What do you want, Mara? Ananda says. I'm here to see the Buddha. Mara responds, and exasperated, Ananda replies, well, you can't. He's busy. He's really busy right now. But Mara and Ananda know Buddha is never busy for an inquiring guest and never dismisses anyone. So Ananda begrudgingly brings Mara in. Ananda announces to the Buddha that someone is there to see them, and disappointed, shares that it is Mara. The Buddha responds, Mara, my dear friend, come in. Ananda, please make me and our guest some tea. I assure you, Ananda then had the most confusing tea-making session of their life. To serve that which is ultimate and kind and true in the Buddha is like a dream come true, but having to acknowledge and then even to tend to that which brings frustration and confusion and distress and seems so anti-pleasure, so anti-enlightenment. Here before Ananda, wisdom and distress are sharing space, and Ananda was making them both tea. Once the tea was ready and Ananda presented it, the Buddha poured Mara a cup first, turned to Mara, and with deep compassion asked, how are you, my dear? What troubles you? For those who are comfortable grounding themselves in a posture of how to pray or meditate, let us enter a prayerful mood. Spirit of life, may our hearts be open for that which is a message for us today. May we be discriminant in being able to identify what speaks to us and what will aid us and support us in being of service, to pleasure, to justice, to love, and to healing for all. May it be so. Ashe. Amen.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea.
We're grateful for all the ways in which you support us and one another. Phone calls and Zoom gatherings, getting groceries for those who need them, and preparing for the day when this pandemic crisis comes to a close. Based upon your generosity and appreciation for our outreach through plate sharing, we will continue to share our general offering with the organizations that are in harmony with our values, who do work in the world that brings us ever closer to creating the beloved community. This month, we share our offering with Campaign Zero, a Black-led nonprofit that supports analysis of policing practices across the country, research to identify effective solutions to end police violence, technical assistance to organizers leading police accountability programs, and the development of model legislation and the advocacy to end police violence nationwide. Campaign Zero seeks to be a part of the changes needed in the movement for Black lives and to end the harm caused by white supremacy. You can find the links for donating to support our congregation and Campaign Zero in the chat box and on our website. And now will you please join in singing our unison doxology.
This reading is adapted from an article by Karen Hall in Psychology Today. Do you hate problem solving? Problem solving is a challenge for many. Facing problems means uncomfortable emotions that most would prefer to avoid. At the same time, solving problems effectively is an important skill to create the life you want to live. Avoiding problems because you hate the process usually means the issue gets worse. Emotionally sensitive people are often creative problem solvers. They find solutions that no one else considered, but afterwards seemed so obvious. For some, though, their natural problem-solving process has been damaged by life situations, and they have learned to fear even having a problem to solve. You may also struggle with the emotions that are part of problem solving. If you say to yourself, "I don't know what to do," because you are worried that your sister will be upset with you, then the issue is that you don't want to deal with the emotion involved in the solution. Sometimes emotions give us helpful information to consider, such as being sad that you wouldn't have as much time with your granddaughter if you go back to school. And sometimes emotions are blocks to living your best life. Consider the emotions about a solution separate from the actual solution. Perhaps you have received repeated feedback that you are wrong for the way you think or feel. That happens to emotionally sensitive people. If that's the case, then you may look to others to determine how valuable or realistic your ideas are, or perhaps even depend on others to solve problems, believing that you cannot. You've learned to be passive, You may spend most of your time attempting to get others to solve problems for you. If you recognize yourself in any of these descriptions, then remember that solving problems is a process that can be learned.
Wow, thank you so much, Ted and Richard. I love the first line in that piece, which says, you are a I rest. I felt it. Similarly, when I was 17, I decided I wanted rest. I needed an altar. And I had just left the spiritual community I was raised in due to what I'll call theological snags, but I still longed for roots in my psyche, for a larger purpose and meaningfulness to live by. So short of a credo or any clear guidance, I decided to make an altar. I found a wooden bench at the local Salvation Army. By much maneuvering, brought it home in my Toyota Corolla, dragged it up to my room, set it up by the window, and thought, great. Now what? What should an altar have? What do I do at an altar? I didn't have any clear practices or a vetted lineage. I just cleared the deck, was 17 and idealistic. So I put on my altar hopes, inspirations, things I found were beautiful, incense cones, trinkets from Ethiopia with my family, just knickknacks. And then almost every day I would go and sit in front of it. Really not sure what exactly it was I was expecting, only that I wanted to formally register my desire with the universe, or maybe myself, or my ancestors, or a higher consciousness, really anything benevolent, for help, for clarity, for roots, for something meaningful which bridged my most ultimate desires for peace and beauty and love and contentment and justice. And if they could spare the time, maybe some skills to help manage my life and my emotions. It was an open letter for anyone because your girl wanted help. In the summer of that year, my mom, who is a licensed therapist, shared with me a piece of paper she regularly gives to clients. It lists on one side the characteristics of a differentiated person, and on the other, the characteristics of a non-differentiated person. And I tell y'all, that side of differentiation was some otherworldly mumbo jumbo extraterrestrial gibberish to my current state of emotional intelligence. But I knew I wanted it. At least, well, first I wanted to understand it, and then I wanted to be able to become it, to become differentiated, to be able to be content and stable emotionally. So I added it to my altar, and I read it as part of my daily registration of hope and desires for help. And soon enough, I found Thich Nhat Hanh and Buddhist psychology and was able to theologically back the intense work before me. To return to contentment or some original state of wholeness, I needed to move through and identify the obstacles that wedged me so far from what I believe is, hopefully, I think, our most innate state of being, to love, to serve. The returning required me to identify and digest and untangle and rewire traumatized nervous system and body and mind. Because as you may know, the cost of oppression is multidimensional and it is thorough. I got really into silent seated meditation. It was my solace, my respite, my shelter. And years later, I was visiting one of Thich Nhat Hanh's monasteries in the States when I realized a distinct shift from how I was approaching spiritual practices and how Thich represented them. To survive the trauma that Thich experienced in his life, to process the grief thrown at him, and to shape the waves of change and healing and love he has done as a prominent leader of engaged Buddhism in the East and West, Thich Nhat Hanh did not go to meditation as only an escape from problems. Thich Nhat Hanh's mindfulness fueled the revolution. Meditation up to that point was a break from the storm in me. And now, with some rest kind of built up in my body, I could digest a further step or use of spirituality. Spirituality to fuel my life, to fuel a revolution. From them, to be where I launch from, and not only where I land to take shelter, to be a proactive spiritual practitioner. This is found in the 3rd chapter also of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, who's the supreme personality of Godhead, literally the most attractive and ultimate personality of the universe itself, is just dropping mad facts on Arjuna, who is his friend, and who, like us, Arjuna thinks perhaps philosophy or really great thinking, maybe it could be an escape from the mess, that our coping skills are about bypassing or dropping out of the struggle, and maybe even avoiding the whole painful, agonizing bits that others with lesser theologies have to grovel in. Well, Krishna comes back with some truth. He explains that some can experience relief through thinking. They can think their way out of suffering or attachment, and that's called jnana yoga. But a greater path is to dovetail our material lives to our ultimate ideals through service. And this is called karma yoga, which is what Thich Nhat Hanh was doing. To use what we have in service to the web of life, to the ultimate, to the absolute spirituality, which is relevant and proactive. I think it's common to be wary in UU spaces of spiritual cliches which shield a person or a community from accountability. But I want to unpack something else, the slippery things we do in between. When we lean too strongly into thinking or the papers or the analytical side of anti-oppression, when we leave the revolution to be a mental transformation alone, I believe we're setting ourselves up to fail. We're not only thinking beings, we are feeling, experiencing beings, and the revolution will not be suffice to stay a mental exercise. It requires we get our hands dirty, our heart in the arena, and our nervous system held accountable and supported. Our reading explains how we have been conditioned to avoid the sticky. Quote, you may have learned over time that you can't always manage your emotions, and sticking to the familiar at least means the world is more predictable, but staying in the familiar may mean avoiding changes that come with solving problems, end quote. Using our philosophies to defend staying in the familiar is called spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is a term to identify when someone utilizes their spirituality or practice to strategically denounce responsibility or avoid healthy discomfort. And even the stages of healing can be programmed into our psyches as uncomfortable. The story of the Buddha, Ananda and Mara, is a great example of those two forms of spiritual bypassing I've witnessed most often. The first is thinking the grief, the anger, whatever the pain in the world is, should never mix with that which we know to be good, wise, and loving. Like peas touching your cake on your dinner plate, Mara should never touch the Buddha. If we're in a good space, we try to dodge the sadness welling up on our body. If we're in love, we don't want to have a difficult, messy conversation. If we value peace or nonviolence or pleasure, we may falsely equate that with avoiding the horrendous, truly tragic parts of the world, like racial injustice, gender oppression, social inequities, and so many other evils. But that would be a false conclusion. The mess, the illusion, the grief, the ugh of life are not antithetical to preferring care, kindness, love, beauty, and joy, and wisdom. Like Ananda, we know to value and protect. The ugh is an inevitable guest, not a new homeowner. And so we, as the Buddha, must have a practice of being with Mara. In fact, Mara is an informative guest of what needs healing, what needs rebinding to the whole in a service that liberates all. The second form of spiritual bypassing I've witnessed is the misdirected martyr. This is the well-intentioned person who doesn't deny illusion. No, instead, they wallow in it. They soak it up. They become it. They are lost in it. If they're not feeling disgusted and ashamed, if they're not feeling exhausted and tormented, if they're not feeling enraged and cynical in every moment as an evidence of their being woke, well, they aren't doing the work. They aren't dedicated enough, and that's not allowed. To that intense commitment, hear me when I say, hold your horses, hold your cows, y'all, hold your donkeys, hold your egos, hold whatever. From the story, we heard that the Buddha did not become Mara. The Buddha was empathetic and remained differentiated, connected, and separate, caring for a guest and not handing over the keys to the kingdom. To be with and support you, I do not have to become a neon version of your pain. I'll give another example. Perhaps this is like an interpersonal example. Imagine you've had something happen to you during the day, you're a little upset about it, and then you go and share with a friend. And the friend says, wow, that's really upsetting. And you're thinking, yeah, validate it, I appreciate it. It did suck. And they continue. And their sadness turns to grief. And now they're enraged. And now they're livid and distraught. And now they're more upset about what happened to you than you even know what happened. And it's all about them. They're helping, their solidarity isn't doing anything about the issue. They are now consumed by the emotion. They're drowning. How do you feel? Has your problem been solved? Similarly, let us not be tricked by the temptation of over-endeavoring and allow our consciousness to be eclipsed by a natural reaction to injustice and falsely begin to identify our rage as the revolution. Put simply, y'all, we can't be at a 10 out of 10 all the time. It's taxing our nervous systems. It isn't sustainable in relationships, and it doesn't equate change. Grief, rage, and pain at the nightmare is all natural and necessary, but it is no heroic feat to be tormented constantly. So how can we hold space and empathize with our emotions and remain differentiated so we take strategic action to address the issue, that we grieve and do something, that we feel the rage and take sustainable action, joining lineages of healing and liberation organization? Spiritual practices, I believe, helps with that process. They awaken and feed our curiosity, and they help us tap into our compassion and our commitment. Spiritual bypassing and spiritual practices are the trajectory differences of encouragement versus enabling. When we are enabled, people, including ourselves, use all the evidence to trace back to our abdication of responsibility. We say, "Oh, you couldn't help it," or it was impossible to do otherwise. There's no consequences, just go with the flow. And whatever pithy maxim, the point is you're not responsible, and emphasizing our powerlessness. Enabling or spiritual bypassing is a tool of empire or oppression, because in its own roundabout way, it allows oppression to continue by silencing people and brainwashing them to believe they are powerless. However, when we are supported, people, including ourselves, use all evidence to trace back to our inherent characteristics and how they can be engaged to bring healing. Who, and what you are is what is vital in this moment. It is natural and needed. We do rituals which remind us you have inherent worth and dignity. It's impossible to separate yourself from the web of life. We are shapers of change, and your curiosity, your creativity, your voice, your artistic style, your knack for numbers, your body and senses and mind and intellect are all exactly what this web needs to continue organizing and shaping our new earth. Spiritual practices invite our body and our minds and our hearts back home, into the posture of remembering our place in service to something grand. It could be through chanting, or meditation, or singing, or tarot, or enjoying your morning coffee or tea outside, or hiking, or dancing, or other rituals made sacred by their lineage and by their intention. So do not leave your heart for later. Don't place your inner life to a back shelf. This is vital, proactive, social imperative practice space. And without the personal experience prerequisite, to be frank, we won't be qualified to sustain the larger unlearning and rebuilding and binding in the public square because we have no practice. So I invite you, build a practice, tend to your practice, so that you can welcome pain, frustration, and grief and offer it tea, compassion, curiosity. And then do not become it. Thank the guest for the information, but do not grip the emotion. Be informed and let it pass through. In closing, one example of a spiritual practice is a song by Thich Nhat Hanh's community in Plum Village. It's titled "Go as a River," and this ritual is a time to be reminded and supported back home into a proactive spirituality. The chorus goes like this. Please excuse my morning singing voice. I'll read it first and then I will sing the tune. It goes, "I want to go as the river, not as the drop of water. Let us flow in harmony. Selfishness we surrender. I want to go as the river, not as the drop of water. We learn to live mindfully, truly there for each other." We would sing this song in meditation while working in the garden or cooking at the monastery. I want to go as the river, not as the drop of water. Let us flow in harmony. Selfishness we surrender. I want to go as the river, not as the drop of water. We learn to live mindfully, truly there for each other. However you go about a personal spiritual practice, let it fill you. Let it fuel you on this journey so that you may have the fortification for something more grand. To do the spectrum shifting quantum leap times like these demand. And then rinse and repeat. This is a lifestyle of healing. Much love.
Ray, hold on. I think you need to unmute yourself again. Sorry. Thank you, Ray. And thank you to Reverend Yadenee and all our other musicians this morning. Please join me in speaking the words of our unison benediction. Engage with the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings.